And now let's proceed to the Commonwealth period, Re-Emergence of Nationalism via Language on 1935 to 1945. I am Siti Halima Mangutara Unti and I am the first reporter of this group. Now I'll be starting my part of the report, which is about education and language during the Commonwealth period from 1935 to 1945. During this time, the Philippines was still preparing for full independence. Kaya ang focus ng leaders before was to make sure that the country would be ready not just politically or economically but also in terms of nation building. That's why education and language policies were very important during those times, and education was seen as the foundation to build responsible citizens, and at the same time, language was viewed as the key to unite us as one nation. So in this part of the report, we'll see how the Commonwealth government tried to expand education, improve teacher training, promote vocational learning, and also the start process of the developing a national language. And now we will know the objectives of education during the Commonwealth period. The first one is to expand free public education. So the Commonwealth government focused on expanding free public education. So the idea here was to make sure na mas maraming Filipino children could go to school regardless of whether they were rich or poor. And before, not everyone had access to education, especially those in the provinces. But during the Commonwealth, the government pushed for more public schools to be built, and they wanted education to be free in the primary level. This was part of preparing Filipinos to be literate citizens and ready for independence. Kasi kung walang access to education, how can we create a strong and democratic nation? Ayon nga kay former President, the keynote of the educational policy is nationalism. Manuel L. Quezon's quote means education should build love for the country, pride in being Filipino, and responsibility to serve the nation, not just to teach knowledge, but also for personal success. And that's how important the education was during those times. The Tidings Magna Law, also known as the Philippine Independence Act of 1934, was a law passed by the United States Congress, and basically it laid down the process for the Philippines to transition from being a U.S. colony to becoming an independent nation. Included in this law were provisions about government, economy, and also language and education. But now let's focus on the language provision. First, public education during the Commonwealth period was primarily in English, meaning English became the main language of instructions in schools, which also reflected how strong the American influence was in our education system. Second, some Filipinos saw this as a limitation, kasi kung laging English ang gamit, it somehow blocked the development and adaptation of a new national language that would truly represent the Filipino identity. On the other hand, others thought it was actually flexible because even English is the main language. The law did not really prohibit Filipinos from promoting vernacular languages or planning for a national language. So in that sense, may freedom pa rin. Fourth, at the same time, this provision ensured that English stayed as the dominant language of instruction during the Commonwealth. So kahit may push for a national language, English remained the official and practical choice for education. And lastly, the law left space for Filipinos themselves to debate and plan for what their national language should be. In other words, it gave them the responsibility to shape their own linguistic identity while English held the system together. So the Tidings Magna Law showed that tension between continuing the use of English and at the same time preparing the ground for a truly Filipino national language. Now let's move on to the 1934 Constitutional Convention and the language question. Dito nagsimula ang isa sa pinaka-importanting debate sa history natin kung ano ang magiging national language ng Pilipinas. The biggest question during the convention was, should the Philippines have a national language? And if yes, alin sa mga existing languages ang pipiliin? This was a crucial issue kasi language is directly connected to the national unity and identity. So the delegates agreed that a national language was necessary to strengthen unity and nationalism, pero hindi sila nagkakasundo-sundo kung alin ang dapat piliin. Kaya dito nagsimula yung malalaking debate. Marami sa delegates gustong panatilihin ang English as the official language. Why? Because first, English was already widely used across the islands. Second, most teachers had been trained in English kaya mas madali ang pagtuturo. Third, the younger generation at that time had already been educated in English, kaya natural na daw sa kanila. And fourth, English was the commercial language used in trade and business with America and other countries. Fifth, a lot of literatures, textbooks, and systems of instruction were already in English. And finally, the tidings itself, the law itself, required English to be the main language of instruction. Pero hindi lahat sang-ayon dito. May ilang delegates na gusto pa rin isama ang Spanish as an official language dahil matagal din itong naging language of government and law. On the other hand, may malakas din na grupo na nag-push na ang Tagalog or another language or native language should be adopted bilang national language. And their reason was simple. Kailangan ng sariling wika para mas lumakas ang identity ng bawat Filipino. Maraming proposals ang lumabas during the debates. Some of these were, first, English should be the only official language. Second, English and Spanish should be retained together. Third, Tagalog should be the official language. Fourth, magtatag ng isang National Language Academy to study and recommend the best national language. Fifth, Tagalog should directly become the national language. Sixth, the national language should be chosen from the Philippine dialects through referendum. And lastly, a national language should be developed based on Tagalog. So as you can see, sobrang daming ideas and proposals, which shows how sensitive and important the language issue was. So in the end, the convention reached a compromise. Ang napagkasunduan ay English and Spanish will remain as the official languages for now. A national language would later be developed based on one of the native dialects. And the National Assembly was given the responsibility to carry this out. So hindi pa totally na-solve yung issue sa convention, pero naglatag sila ng foundation for future development of the national language. This part talks about the role of the first National Assembly in the development of our national language. After the 1935 Constitution was ratified, isa sa pinaka-importanting duties nila was to decide how the Philippines would have a common language that could unite the people. And one of the most important tasks of the National Assembly was to develop a national language. Nakasulat ito mismo sa 1935 Constitution, so they had the responsibility to create steps para magkaroon ng iisang wika ang Pilipinas. On October 7, 1936, President Manuel L. Quezon gave a message to the Assembly. Ang sabi niya, a common language is very important to strengthen national unity and solidarity. And he also said na dapat manggaling ito sa ating native languages or dialects. And because of Quezon's initiative, Commonwealth Act No. 184 was passed on November 13, 1936. And through this law, naitatag ang Institute of National Language or INL, and its role was to select, propagate, and develop the national language. The institute was given specific duties. First, to study the major Philippine languages spoken by at least 500,000 people. Second, gumawa ng comparative vocabulary studies. Third, research phonetics, orthography, and affixes. And then, piliin kung alin ang pinaka-developed in structure, mechanics, and literature. And lastly, consider din kung alin ang language ang pinaka-widely used by Filipinos. The Committee on National Language was chaired by Justice Norberto Romualdez, isang Visayan. Siya ang nag-author ng law that created the institute. And interestingly, kahit Visayan siya, he strongly advocated that Tagalog should be the basis of the national language. And finally, the institute would recommend their chosen native tongue to the President. At kapag inapprove, the President would proclaim it through an executive order as the national language of the Philippines. But it would only take effect 2 years after the proclamation. Why? Para may time ang mga schools, teachers, and even the government to prepare before officially using it. On January 12, 1937, si President Manuel Quezon, he appointed 7 members to create the National Language Institute. And lahat sila from iba't ibang region to represent the major Philippine languages. Ang director noon ay si Jaime de Vera, isang Samariño Visayan. Si Cecilio Lopez naman, isang Tagalog linguist, naging secretary at executive officer. Kasama rin sina Santiago Fonacer Ilocano, Felimon Soto, si siyang Cebuano, and si Casimiro Perfecto, isang Bicol, and Felix Salas Rodriguez, isang Hiligaynon, at si Haji Buto pa sa Muslim community. And later on, may mga replacements din kaya nila Isidro Abad at Zuelo Hilario. On 1938, na-amend ang law at nadagdagan ng 2 members. And they became 6 members. Nadagdagan sina Lope K. Santos, isang Tagalog writer, at Jose Zulueta mula sa Pangasinan, at mula sa pagiging National Language Institute, pinalitan ang name into Institute of National Language. So, naging mas formal din ang structure at dinala under the office of the President. Pero kahit maraming scholars sa grupo, sobrang bigat ng trabaho. Sa loob ng isang taon, hindi pa rin nila natatapos lahat ng requirements. So kailangan nila ng mas maraming linguistic experts at halos si Cecilia Lopez talagang nag-guide ng work. And interesting ba yung deliberations nila in Spanish, pero yung minutes written in English. So bakit Tagalog? Sabi ng studies, Tagalog ang pinaka-develop in grammar and structure. May pinakamaraming literary works din at ito rin ang widely spoken either as first language or second language. Na-confirm pa ito ng 1939 census. Noong November 9, 1937, naglabas ng resolution ang Institute recommending Tagalog as the basis of the national language. And their reason is, ito ang pinaka-pumapasa sa requirements ng law and hindi lang sila mismong naniniwala but supported din ito ng scholars, patriots at pati mga newspapers. On Rizal Day, December 30, 1937, si President Quezon signed Executive Order No. 134 na officially declaring that Tagalog as the basis of the national language. In-announce niya pa ito sa radio broadcast na sobrang symbolic kasi sabay sa death anniversary ni Rizal. Ang sabi niya, kailangan natin ng sariling wika na talagang rooted sa Filipino culture, hindi Spanish or English. Pero hindi agad naging effective. By law, kailangan ng 2 taon preparation. Kaya noong December 30, 1939, officially naging base ng national language ang Tagalog. So ang bilis ng process because Quezon showed strong leadership. The institute members were also highly respected kaya hindi na masyadong nako-question. And of course, people believe na ito ay for the common good kaya hindi nagkaroon ng malalaking opposition. But of course, hindi rin lahat sumang-ayon. May nagsabi na baka masira ang ibang dialects, baka undemocratic o baka mawala ang English. May article pa nga na tinawag na 10 Errors of the National Language Movement. Pero despite those criticisms, maraming scholars at leaders ang nag-defend at naniwalang tamang naging choice. Si James De Vera, director ng institute, he said, "We now have a national language, Tagalog." Pero dinagnag niya rin sa lahat ng ibang wika ng Pilipinas ay expected pa rin mag-contribute sa enrichment ng national language. So, it means Tagalog is the base pero magiging mas rich pa dahil may halong elements ng ibang dialects. 1940 was a milestone year because dito unang pumasok ang national language sa schools. And by this time, ready na rin ang vocabulary at grammar so pwede na talagang ituro sa mga estudyante. And under Section 8 of Commonwealth Act No. 184, the Institute of National Language was required to prepare a dictionary and a grammar of the national language after ma-proclaim ng President. And natapos nila to, then they submitted it to the President for approval. On April 12, 1940, Executive Order No. 263 was issued. This ordered the printing of a Tagalog-English vocabulary and ang balarila ng wikang pambansa. And at the same time, inutusan din lahat ng schools, both public and private, to start teaching the national language. And Section 9 of the same law said na within 2 years after proclamation, the national language should already be taught in all schools and it should follow the official dictionary and grammar prepared by the institute. May interesting anecdote about Quezon. When he saw Lope K. Santos, balarila ng wikang pambansa, he got mad and even threatened to throw it into the Pasig River. Ang sabi niya, ano itong balarila? Bakit hindi pa tawaging gramatika? He's concerned if siya na Tagalog speaker had a hard time understanding it, paano pa kaya yung mga non-Tagalog? To implement this, the Secretary of Public Instruction released a department order on April 8, 1940. And starting June 19, tinuro na ang national language sa 4th year ng lahat ng high schools at sa 2nd year ng mga teacher training institutions. And according to the Bureau of Education Circular No. 26, the national language would be taught 40 minutes a day and as a regular required subject for 2 semesters. And sa normal schools, it replaced 1 elective. At sa secondary schools, it was added as an extra subject. The plan was to gradually introduce the subject starting from higher years and eventually going down to lower grade levels. Ginawa nila to para may enough time to train teachers and prepare instructional materials. And they also allowed the use of the national language inside school buildings and grounds. And at the same time, local vernaculars were still permitted as auxiliary languages in the primary grades, which had already started in 1939. And overall, this marked the beginning of the nationwide propagation and development of the national language. So slowly but surely, the language started spreading and becoming part of the country's educational system.